What's going on? This is Tori Kravitz, and welcome back to another episode of She's with the Band here on KNOTFEST. We are in Leeds, and I'm joined now by Serena from Svalbard. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. It's really lovely to be here with you.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And we're in person, which is a rare occasion. Hopefully not too rare for long, but for She's with the Band, it's really nice to have like that in-person connection, just be able to hang with you before your show tonight. So, I mean, I know the tour's been going really well. Really seeing the reception from fans of like this new album since it just came out. So how's it been?
This tour has been incredible. What's really amazed me the most is, the album only came out 2 weeks ago, but there's fans at the shows that already know all the words to the songs, which is just amazing. And seeing the impact of these new songs and hearing like the feedback from the fans again in person, You can't replace that atmosphere at a show, and it's been amazing playing the new songs live as well. So super excited.
I mean, it must be so nice as well because like when an album first comes out, I'm sure it's mostly just like the album reviews from, the big magazines. So it's a little cold, isn't it? Like the feedback's like almost, I don't want to say it's not real because reviews matter, but like then when you get to see how the fans actually feel like that, to me at least, that would matter more, doesn't it? Like that's what you're kind of waiting for, isn't it?
Absolutely. Do you know what? I always think you've really released an album once it's out and you're playing it live and you play those new songs at the shows. That's when it feels complete as a kind of release cycle process. I know exactly what you mean. It feels quite distant having like a bunch of reviews, and it's been really nice seeing all the positive reviews. Like that has been absolutely amazing as well. But once you actually hear from the fans and you're there with them in person and you're sharing that music in the moment, that's when it really feels complete.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like the lyrics on this album I can tell are so personal, which we'll get into, but do you find that sometimes your perspective of a song changes once you start to hear how fans are interpreting it or how they're starting to feel about the music or how it may be changing their life in some way?
Definitely, and that's one of the reasons why I write the lyrics I do, is to create that resonance with the fans. And then when they talk to me about the meaning of, a new song, and they tell me like how it helped them get through something. There was a person yesterday who was telling me about their struggles with addiction and how one of our songs helped them through that. And that's not something I've experienced. So it was really interesting to hear their interpretation of the song, and then it makes it mean even more. Right.
It's like even though the lyrics, and I know you do this quite deliberately, how they're very specific. Like you don't really use too many metaphors because you want people to understand exactly what you're saying. And even by being so direct that it can have so many different interpretations anyway. That's really, really cool.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And there's my review going into the press pile. And so we had a really awesome Uber ride on the way here to this podcast studio because we were very quickly geeking out because you're like, all right, American accent, where's she from? And it turns out I'm from Orlando, Florida, where you frequent very often. You were just at Halloween Horror Nights because I was creeping the Twitter and saw that you went. So how was your time in Orlando? I have to ask.
Oh, I had the best time in Orlando last month. As you said, I went for Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios. Absolutely loved it. I love the atmosphere of Halloween Horror Nights. It's just not like anything else. It just feels like one big spooky party. I love it. And I love that like all of the houses were amazing. My favourite house was Dueling Dragons, Choose Thy Fate. Just such a beautiful house. I really felt like it was like stepping into D&D or like fantasy realm or even World of Warcraft, like the set design and the big like dragons and the special effects.
It was loved so good. It. Yeah, and what's cool about that is obviously they're the hyped up houses like Exorcist and The Last of Us, which I know you were there to review. But Dueling Dragons was just like the fan service for Universal Studios fan, where it's like if you know, you know, and if you don't, like it's still a cool house, but that moment where it splits off and it's the ode to the roller coaster, just very special.
Yeah.
I was geeking. And it even looked like the queue for the old ride and stuff, so that was sick.
It was amazing. I loved it.
Very niche conversation, and we could easily spend all podcasts talking about just this. So I will keep us moving along. But I do know you also contribute to Games Radar, which is why you have quite the expertise on like pop culture, and you mentioned World of Warcraft. Even your song How to Swim Down is inspired by World of Warcraft a little bit. So do you find that this expertise that you have in like video games and pop culture ends up servicing you a bit in your music?
Oh, absolutely. Like, gaming bleeds very, very heavily into everything else that I do. I often find, like, it can change the way you make decisions, but it also changes the way I think about creating music. I'm hugely inspired by video game soundtracks. I think like the Final Fantasy soundtracks are some of the most beautiful soundtracks ever made. And sometimes I'll be writing something on guitar and then I'll be like, oh no, that's from Final Fantasy VII. That's not my idea.
Yeah, sometimes does that happen legitimately? Like you're like, oh man, I got this sick idea, and they're like, no, because it's sometimes just in your subconscious. You may not even really realize.
Exactly. Yeah, it happens without even realizing. There was one the other day. I was like, oh, that's just Aerith's theme. Oh no, but yeah, really, really big into gaming, and then with World of Warcraft inspiring How to Swim Down. That song is a song about unrequited love. And I was playing a lot of WoW. At the same time, I was going through this doomed romance. And
feel that.
And I was playing as a healer, and I was kind of, you know what it's like where you look for symbolism in everything that you do when you're sort of coping with something. And I was healing these other people from standing from afar, like, you know, making sure they were all okay. And I was like, it's so symbolic.
Oh, you were really going through it then.
Yeah, so that's why I used playing as a healer as an analogy in that song. But yeah, gaming permeates everything I do. And
I found it quite interesting how you just said it changes the way you make decisions. What do you mean by that? Is that like in music or just like in life?
I find Baldur's Gate 3, it just changes you end up thinking about things like regular decisions you make as a kind of roll for initiative. I'm sorry, I'm going really niche here. But yeah, I find if you play enough RPGs, you tend to think of things in that almost like I don't want to say strategic way because I'm not sure if that's the right word, but that kind of optional way, as if life is an RPG and you've just got to roll the dice.
I mean, do we have any proof that it's not? I don't know. I mean, that's getting a little too deep. That conversation could go down a rabbit hole, but you just never know. But I know also there's another song in the album that I really want to ask about because obviously this is KNOTFEST. That's an ode to Joey Jordison. And you have a really cool story about like your connection to him and how he's inspired your journey. So could you share a little more about that too?
Oh, of course. I mean, Joey Jordison is a musician who means the absolute world to me. He's the reason I started playing music. When I was 12 years old, I actually started learning drums because I had Slipknot self-titled on Digipack CD. And I heard Joey playing and was like, that's the coolest drumming I've ever heard. I want to play like that. So I started playing drums. And I was one of those super fans. I knew everything about Joey that I could. I knew what music he listened to and everything that inspired him. I found out he was really into Mike Patton, and my mum's a record collector who used to take me to a lot of record fairs. So I went to a record fair with my mum and I found this super rare Phantomus Mr. Bungle split, and I bought it for Joey Jordison, and I gave it to him at a signing on the Iowa tour with a little note inside about how he inspired me to play drums and how cool I think he is. Aww. And after the signing, one of their assistants chased me down out of the road and said, oh, Joey wants you to have this. And it was a backstage pass. And we got to hang out and talk about music talk about drums and stuff the night of that show, which was February the 20th, 2002 at Birmingham NEC.
Wow! To the day! I mean, how do you forget the day when that happens?
Yeah, it's an important date for me for sure.
Yeah.
And then ever since then, every time I came over, I'd come to the shows and he'd be like, how's your drums? And how's, well, then I started playing guitar as well and we would talk about that. Joey made so much time for his fans. He is so passionate about music. He lived and breathed music and he encouraged me so much. So when he passed away, I really wanted to honor him and honor that inspiration that he gave me. Mm-hmm. So our song, Eternal Spirits, it's like the musical equivalent of lighting a candle for someone, I think.
Yeah. No, it's such a beautiful song and I think it's really wonderful. really thinking, I mean, how would the band be different if that interaction hadn't happened, or how would your life be different? Like, that is such a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
And you know what? It reminds me, I mean, this is like a very silly comparison, but it reminds me of like Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, like something crazy like that, where you're like, this sounds out of a movie, like just being handed the backstage pass, like, here you go meet the band. Like, when does that happen? So, I mean, it's incredible. Yeah. Really, really cool. And yeah, I do want to talk a little more of a deep dive here on Weight of the Mask, the album that's out now. Just recently came out, because the lyrics on this album seriously read like your diary. Like, it just feels so personal, and I have to commend you because it's so brave the way you've been able to share how you feel. And I know I read in another interview you did with Kerrang that you kind of grappled with like how vulnerable to be and like to really show yourself in that way. Because it takes a lot of courage, especially like when you're having to perform them every night in front of a lot of people. It's like, that's as bare as it gets. So while you're grappling with that, what was like the driving factor to not censor the lyrics, to not tone it down, and to really tell it like it is?
Do you know what? Originally, when I started writing the lyrics to this fourth album, I promised myself that I wasn't going to cut so deep, because our third album is very lyrically intense as well. And performing those songs night after night, it's very weird. In some ways, it's transformative in an empowering sense, but in other ways, it kind of serves as a reminder of something bad that you've struggled with. So I told myself when we started writing album number 4, maybe I'm not going to go so deep this time. And then, but when it came down to writing the lyrics, which is what I always do last, I write the lyrics after we've finished writing all the music, I was going through a really bad episode of depression. And I think when the depression is that bad, it encompasses everything. Like, you cannot see anything beyond it. So it was impossible for me not to write from that really like painful and quite a cutting place. And that's why the lyrics ended up being so personal and so dark and so like brutal in an emotive way, because I think I didn't know how else to be. I couldn't write a song about, you know, feeling empowered or feeling any other feeling, because I was just completely swamped with depression at the time. But the reason as well that I write lyrics so that, I mean, as you say, anyone could read them and it's like they're reading my diaries, because I really want to create that resonance with the listeners. Because I know for me, when I'm really going through a bad time, if I listen to a band and the lyrics describe something similar to what I'm experiencing or feelings that I'm having, it helps so much. Like, that is so therapeutic to me, and it's so validating of what you're experiencing that I wanted to create that similar thing. So thinking it's kind of taking all the pain that's inside and giving it a purpose, if you know what I mean. Yeah, no, it's so true. Like, it really like hits in the gut when you hear lyrics and you're just like, that's exactly it. Like, spot on. And it does, it's as cliche as it is, it's, you know, you're not alone in that moment. Yeah, it's exactly. True. Well, that's what I always say. Like, if there's any one thing that I would like Svalbard's music to achieve, it's to make people feel less alone when they're in a dark place. Yeah, but it's an interesting point you say, because as much as it's like constructive in that way and so helpful, like, it also can be that reminder of something so painful. I mean, how do you cope with that on the road? And I mean, knowing you're going to be performing these lyrics in these songs for so many years to come, like, do you just kind of have to block it out at some points, or is it just like, how do you do it? It's really weird. 90% of the time when you go on stage, that's when I feel the most me. That's when I feel the most empowered, when my guitar's on loud and I'm screaming my guts up on stage, and you can just let all the emotions out. So in a lot of ways, that is like the release of the pain. But sometimes there's 10% of the time when you're on stage and you go to scream a lyric, and it might be something, usually what's happening with me on this tour is there'll be a lyric that relates very specifically to something that I'm going through. And there's one like played To Wilt Beneath the Weight last night, and my voice just like broke up with emotion, because there was one line where I was like, oh, I'm feeling that line too much today. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you end up fighting back tears. But I think because we've toured for so many years, you learn how to kind of sit with that like intense expression of emotion.
I guess that's one way to build like emotional resilience. It's just like having to push through it somehow. And one of the songs that really kind of like, how you say like it resonates to me was Faking It. The first time I heard that chorus, I was like, oh no. But in a really lovely way in a sense, because I think anybody even if you're in the public eye or just have a job where you have to be out in public and sometimes you're just really in a bad way, but you have to put on that mask, as you say, or that face of smiling and bubbly and everything's okay, but underneath there's like a pit in your stomach. Like the way you described that was just so spot on. And I do want to ask, because in terms of like the music scene, do you think there's anything we could do to just be kinder to people who are experiencing mental illness so that, I don't know, eventually we just maybe feel like we don't have to put on that mask?
Oh, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I think there's a lot of pressure within the music industry, and there is this huge sense of if you achieve anything musically, you're lucky to be there, because there's thousands and thousands of other bands that would do anything to take your spot.
Right.
And then that kind of pushes you to keep saying, you say yes to everything because you don't want to, you're so scared of losing it all the time. I think there's
it's a scarcity mentality of like, if I don't do everything and be everywhere, I'm going to lose it all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or, something I really fear. It happened a little bit today, actually, but it was with one of the other bands, so maybe it's less bad. Sometimes you just feel sad, and sometimes you're on tour and you haven't had any time to yourself or any moments to like reflect, and people are trying to talk to you and it's too much, and then you worry, oh my God, that's like the one interaction I'm ever going to have with that person, and they're going to think I'm an asshole now. That's definitely sort of, I think, to remember that musicians are human, and on tour, they're operating on very few hours sleep, and there's so much more going on than what you see on the stage of the show. I think would be, quite nice as well. I mean, and then that's not saying like, of course, I don't want to be rude or offish when I meet fans or other people. I do try my very best to be as personable as possible, but sometimes when you're depressed and you're drained, it's really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had that happen before, where I was out on Warped Tour back in the day and I was not in a good way one of the days, and someone came up to me and then I got a tweet later in the day, oh, you were a real bitch to me. And I was like, oh no, I messed it all up. But there's that pressure. Yeah. Because it's like you said, that one interaction, maybe the only interaction they have, and so that's how they know you.
Yeah.
But that's like such a great point, even just for anyone watching this who may see you at a show, just to be like mindful of that. Like, it's probably not you. Yeah. It's probably just the tour.
Yeah, definitely.
If that's the case. But that's a really good point. Yeah. And another thing, because you're on the other side of the interview now, is I know you were in music journalism for quite a while, and even recalled an interview you did with Thin Lizzy back in the day, which I loved that story, by the way. But yeah, I would love to hear a little more about like how that experience was for you being a music journo, and how that impacted like now your perspective of being in a band, seeing your own press coverage, or if it made you wiser in any way.
I absolutely loved writing about music. It was a really, really fun time for me. I was a staff writer at a British extreme metal magazine called Terrorizer, and I'd written for Metal Hammer and all kinds of other places as well. And that for me combined all my loves in one. I love writing, I love metal, and I love having in-depth conversations with people about what they've created. So it was super rewarding for me. And I think how it influenced, one way that it definitely influenced me was there was a lot of times it really influenced my lyric writing. Oh. Because there was a lot of times where I would interview bands and I'd say, what's this song about? Because it's hard to tell. A lot of metal lyrics are very poetic, very like obscured in like long words and
a lot of metaphors.
Very kind of symbolic, and using imagery like Satanism and stuff as a way of symbolizing other things. And it's not always obvious exactly what the songs are about. And I remember interviewing this band and they were like, oh yeah, that song's about abortion rights. And I was like, what? I had no idea, and I've read the lyrics. Right. And that kind of really twigged something in my brain of, I need to make it 100% clear. If we're going to write a song about abortion rights, every single person who listens to this needs to know exactly what it's about. So interviewing bands definitely like changed the way I approached writing lyrics.
Yeah, I love knowing that connection, because I had read, how you very specifically don't use any metaphors. Everything's plain and simple. You could even see it on this album. How you read it, you're like, well, that's stark. I know exactly what that is. But it's like you said, it's if you want people to be able to resonate with your lyrics, they kind of need to know what it's about, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think one of the most powerful things you can do with language is be as clear and concise as possible.
That's a journalist mind.
There we go.
Yeah. Because I get that. I'm always like, how do I use less words?
Yeah.
How do we trim the fat off of the sentences, right?
Do you know what? I use trim the fat. I use that phrase every day in my working life.
Yes. Well, it makes sense because we're both writers. Yeah. Absolutely. And you're also a music fan. Obviously, you wouldn't be in music journalism. You wouldn't be in a band if you weren't like a fan of music. And being the She's with the Band podcast, I love the way you like stand for women, and also like kind of the people who did it before you, who inspired you. And I know one of the first bands you ever saw live was Kitty, which that has my heart. I love that. So how was that experience? Was that literally the first band you ever saw, or was it like one of the first?
It was one of the first bands I ever saw. I think that I'd seen a couple of bands before that. I did see Slipknot before that.
Well, of course.
Of course. I mean, yeah, they were number one priority. But yeah, Kitty, like that's one of the shows, I think, where you feel it change you. You go to a show and you see these amazing women on stage performing their hearts out. Like, I remember just being in awe. And at the time, you forget, there were so few women in metal, so it was such a rarity to see that and to experience it. And you know what? I was at the front and I was surrounded by girls like me. At the time, it was all like, teenage new metal girls. And I used to wear the bracelets. Remember, everyone wore the bracelets. Mm-hmm. And at one point during the set, I like reached up and gave Morgan my bracelet, and she put it on and she wore it for the rest of the set. And I was like, it's fate,
That's some serious girl power.
It was amazing. But like seeing them, hearing Morgan growl, it was after I saw that show that I started trying to growl and stuff like that, and started, trying to be able to perform in a metal band, because they lit that fire inside me. Yeah. And I just think about, maybe 10 years ago, it's definitely getting better now, but 10 years ago, you would get a lot of comments as a woman in a metal band.
Right.
And I think, that was bad for me then, 10 years ago. Imagine how it must have been for Kitty in the year 1999. Mm-hmm. Imagine the comments they got. And then they kept going and they blazed the trail. They're the reason that like women like me can now do this stuff. So I love them.
I know. Trailblazing really is like the first word that comes to mind when I think of Kitty. I love that you've put it that way. So you heard Morgan growl. Did you just go home and like trial and error figure it out? Or like, how did you find your way? I'm curious about this.
I sounded terrible for I couldn't get it, because there's that difference between doing a metal growl, which comes from a really different place, as opposed to a scream, like say if you're on a roller coaster, that kind of thing. Right. And I was just doing that kind of screaming and it sounded rubbish. I couldn't get the metal tone for a really long time. I say this now, I mean, obviously my voice, I don't normally sound like this. I don't normally sound like I've smoked 40 a day. This is a tour voice from 8 days of screaming for an hour on stage.
Yeah, and we threw a podcast in the mix, which I'm so sorry really doesn't help the scenario.
It's all good,
But yeah, so you're saying as well, it's such a good point that women in metal has come such a long way since Kitty and for you now. But I am curious too, because we've come a long way, but we still, I feel like, have a ways to go. So what do you think can be improved upon? Where do you see us like going, hopefully in the next 5 years?
I want to see more women in bands headlining festivals, like the bigger slots, the bigger shows. It's great that nowadays you can look at a metal festival lineup and there's loads of amazing women on the bill. That really excites me. And do you know what's amazing is 10 years ago, we would play a show and I'd be the only woman playing in any band that whole day. Mm-hmm. And now it's so rare that that's the case. And we as a band with Svalbard, we make a point of any time we get to choose our support bands, we always pick bands with women in. We just took a great band on the road with us on this tour called Bones of Minerva from Spain. Absolutely amazing. All women, so inspiring. But I want to see, because there seems to be a bit of a dismissive attitude towards, oh, but women couldn't headline. You know, they're not headline worthy of the big stages. And I want to see that changed next, you know?
I actually saw such an interesting commentary on Twitter as well, where it was saying, like, who's going to be the next generation? Because we still have, like, those old school metal bands are the same headliners now. Like, no shade to Metallica, but, like, who's next, right? So do you think there's any women in metal right now? I mean, I would love to put you in that list, but anyone else as your peers who you're like, that could be the next headliner that you see on the rise?
I absolutely think Nightwish could headline, you know. I mean, they've sold out Wembley Arena here in the UK. They could headline, for example, here in the UK, Download Festival at Donington, play to, you know, 80,000 people or whatever it is. Absolutely, they could do that. And Floor Jansen is one of the most diverse, versatile, and incredible vocalists in metal.
Stage presence. Oh, holy cow.
She is a force of nature. Yeah, she is absolutely incredible. So I'd love to see Nightwish. I saw Evanescence this year as well. Wow. Again, talk about amazing singers. Amy Lee, absolutely phenomenal. They could easily, they've got so many great albums. Again, Within Temptation, Arch Enemy. There's so many great women bands that could easily take those headline slots. I think what's really interesting, though, is this is something I feel quite strongly about with the classic headliners. Obviously, we're still in that phase where we're seeing the same bands, Metallica, Iron Maiden, Rammstein, those types of bands headlining over and over again at festivals. A large part of this, in my thought, is because they came from a different era where it was possible to make really serious big bucks from music. And when you're doing that, it then becomes easier to build a massive show. The amount of money it costs to put on a massive show. So it's one of those things where, because the money was there, because back in the 80s, to listen to a Metallica album, you had to part with cash to do that. And that's just not a thing anymore. Music is airborne now. So people keep saying, I've seen, you know, Steve Salzer from Exodus going, no one's good enough to replace the bands that are headlining now. And I say it's not a talent thing. It's not that the songs aren't there. It's a financial thing. It's that the bands emerging in this day and age aren't making as much money to have those massive big shows. I say that, though, Ghost, the greatest band of the last 20 years. They could easily do it.
But it's definitely a way bigger climb, and it's a lot harder than it used to be. And I mean, you can only buy so many t-shirts, but I will say, like, buying merch and buying the vinyls, buying the CDs, it all helps, doesn't it?
It makes a huge, huge difference. Like, people coming to our shows and buying merch is the reason we're able to tour.
Yeah. Fully. I'm so glad you said that. Like, there needs to be some change to help support the artists in the industry. And I want to see Svalbard headlining Download. Let's freaking go. So first step, buy a t-shirt when you go to the show, and we'll get them there eventually, right? So
eventually, yeah.
And to wrap up our interview, I always end with 4 jaw-dropping questions. We ask these to every artist that comes on. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
I mean, not to, like, build a suspense or anything. But the first one we have here is, what is the most jaw-dropping experience you've ever had at a show? Could be one of yours or one you've been to.
Oh, this is super nerdy. I really love Avantasia, the sort of theatrical symphonic power metal band. And I saw them in London, and they have, you know, they have a lot of singers on stage, I think 6 singers. There was one point in my favourite song, and they played it live, and they had all 6 singers doing 6 different vocal harmonies. And I'm a sucker for, like, loads of people singing in unison and singing in harmony. That is just speaks to my heart. And they did that, and it sounded so beautiful. Like, instantly I was crying. So that is the moment that comes to mind for me.
Oh, that sounds majestic.
Oh, it totally was. It was so cool.
Not nerdy at all. Come on now. This is KNOTFEST. We like all kinds of metal. No judgment. The next one here is the most jaw-dropping misstep early in your career and the lesson that you learned from it.
Oh, I've made so many. I've made so many. I think, oh God.
I just want to, like, for any maybe new bands that are listening, I'm like, well, we like to learn from each other's mistakes, so this is helpful, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm going to be totally honest.
Okay.
Before I was in Svalbard, I was in a band with a person who was using that band to try and get with me. And because I was so desperate to play music and be in a band, I stayed in that situation, even though I had someone, being very heavy on the pursuit, making it very clear what they wanted, and I wasn't interested, and I put myself in a really uncomfortable position. And my first piece of advice is, if it makes you uncomfortable, leave.
Oh, that is so important, literally in every way, especially because this is like a women-focused podcast. I mean, this could happen to anybody, but, especially us ladies, so massively important.
Yeah.
And interesting as well, because I would like to just say that so much of the time a misconception is that like women get into the music industry because they're trying to have that kind of pursuit. So let's just take a moment that this went the other way and you had nothing to do with it.
Do you know what? I hate that as well. I always hear this, girls only get into metal because they want the attention of the guys in the scene, as if we don't have our own agency, as if we can't just love the music, know?
Yeah, exactly. So in a way, I feel like you've debunked something really important here. So thank you. Massively important, because I just love metal. I just have chicks on this podcast. So I'm not here for anything except to support my fellow chicks.
And I appreciate that.
Of course. And speaking of the most jaw-dropping female artists that you would love to work with.
Oh God, there's so many, but I think I am going to have to go with Floor Jansen from After Forever and Nightwish. Like, what a powerhouse of a vocalist. Just incredible. Everything she does is gold, and she's so like musically inspiring. I love the versatility of her voice, and I would just imagine singing with her, and she can do the growls as well.
Yeah.
So she's just incredible. I think I'd be really starstruck though. I'd just sort of stand there.
You would just like forget to sing and just stare.
Yeah. I'd just let her sing and just listen.
I feel like that could be such a cool fit as well, because like your music has so many different elements intertwined, and there's these moments of like really ethereal, beautiful, and then it gets so heavy, and like her voice would just be so perfect within all of that as well.
Imagine that. Imagine her voice like over the top of some of the prettier parts of Svalbard. Wow.
That's where my brain went.
Yeah.
I'm sold. And the last one we have here, the most jaw-dropping misconception about you or the band that you want to clear up.
Oh, everyone thinks I'm really like angry and really, they think that my persona on stage is who I am in real life. I get this a lot. I get people, because I'm quite shy in real life, and people meet me and maybe they've seen the show and then they come and speak to me afterwards, and they're like, oh, you're so like soft, and I remember someone once said to me, when I was watching you on stage, I was really scared of you, and now I'm talking to you now and I want to bring you home to meet my mother. Which is a weird thing to say.
It's so funny though, because I feel like that is actually the most common misconception across the board with most of the guests on this podcast, because the music is so fierce and so heavy with a lot of these artists that it's like you just assume that that's who the person is. Yeah. But it's kind of what you were saying as well, how what you do on stage is like the release, and it's almost like the release so that you can be like the quiet, nice, ethereal person that you are off stage.
Definitely. I think it's healthy. Yeah, I think it's so healthy to be able to go up on stage and scream. And then you come off and you're super chill. Yeah. You're always at your most chill after you've played a show.
I think I need that. I think I need to start a metal band just so I can have that.
Oh, please do.
I'll let you know. I may need some lessons first. Well, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and taking the time out of a busy show day to be here. Like, I feel very honored, and seriously, thank you. And before we wrap this up, do you have any plans for 2024 that you want to share? Because this will be coming out around then as well.
Ooh, when's it going to be coming out?
Probably January.
Oh, okay. I think I can announce it then. We're going to be doing a European and UK tour with Enslaved. Super excited. They are one of my favourite bands. So cannot wait. Yeah, doing some mainland Europe shows and UK. Really, really looking forward to it.
Oh, congratulations. That's so exciting. And just lots of support for the new album, and really getting to hear those songs live is going to be really special.
Yes. And hopefully we're going to be playing in some countries that we've not played in before.
And wink, wink.
Yeah. Later on in the year.
Cool. So where can anybody keep in touch? Is there like a specific website that's like the hub for all the tour dates?
No, because we're not professional.
Just Google it.
Yeah, for tour dates and stuff. I mean, our socials are a good place to check. Now you've said this, I'm like, we need to get a website. Okay, coming in 2024.
On the to-do list.
Yes.
By the time this airs, there will be a website, maybe.
I promise, there will.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
To everybody who's watching, make sure you stay tuned every other week here on KNOTFEST.com for She's with the Band. I've been Tori Kravitz, and we'll catch you next time. Bye, y'all.